And if the goal is to promote liberty, you can unify all segments. The freedom message brings us together. It doesn't divide us.
If you were president, would you work to phase out the IRS?
Immediately.
That's what they call a softball.
And you can only do that if you change our ideas about what the role of government ought to be. If you think the government has to take care of us from cradle to grave, and if you think our government should police the world and spend hundreds of billions of dollars on a foreign policy that we cannot manage, you can't get rid of the IRS. But if you want to lower taxes, and if you want the government to quit printing the money to come up with the shortfall and cause all the inflation, you have to change policy. Programs like this are not authorized under the Constitution. The trouble with this, issues like this is, in Washington, we either prohibit it or subsidize it. Right. And the market should deal with it and the states should deal with it. Okay. I trust the internet a lot more. And I trust the freedom of expression, and that's why we should never interfere with the internet. The purpose of government is to protect the secrecy and the privacy of all individuals, not the secrecy of government. I mean, we stood up to the Soviets. They had 40,000 nuclear weapons. Now we're fretting day in and day night about third world countries that have no army, navy, or air force, and we're getting ready to go to war. If you think we can continue to police the world and spend hundreds of billions of dollars overseas and spend hundreds of billions of dollars running a welfare state, an entitlement system that has accumulated $60 trillion worth of obligations, and think that we can run the economy this way, we spend so much money now that we have to borrow nearly $3 billion a day from foreigners to take care of our consumption. You
would eliminate the Department of Homeland Security in the midst of a war, sir?
Well, I think we should not go to more bureaucracy. It didn't work. We were spending $40 billion on security prior to 9/11, and they had all the information they needed there to deal with the threat. And it was inefficiency. So what do? We add a gigantic bureaucracy.
Congressman, you don't think that changed with the 9/11 attack, sir?
What changed?
The non-interventionist policies.
No, non-intervention was a major contributing factor. Have you ever read about the reasons they attacked us? They attack us because we've been over there. We've been bombing Iraq for 10 years. We've been in the Middle East. I think Reagan was right. We don't understand the irrationality of Middle Eastern politics. So right now we're building an embassy in Iraq that's bigger than the Vatican. We're building 14 permanent bases. What would we say here if China was doing this in our country or in the Gulf of Mexico? We would be objecting. We need to look at what we do from the perspective of what would happen if somebody else did it to us.
That's really an extraordinary statement. It's an extraordinary statement. As someone who lived through the attack of September 11, that we invited the attack because we were attacking Iraq. I don't think I've ever heard that before, and I've heard some pretty absurd explanations for the congressman to withdraw that comment and tell us that he didn't really mean that.
Congressman?
I believe very sincerely that the CIA is correct when they teach and talk about blowback. When we went into Iran in 1953 and installed the Shah, yes, there was blowback. The reaction to that was the taking of our hostages, and that persists. And if we ignore that at our own risk. That if we think that we can do what we want around the world and not incite hatred, then we have a problem. They don't come here to attack us because we're rich and we're free. They come and they attack us because we're over there. I mean, what would we think if we were if other foreign countries were doing that to us?
Can I have 30 seconds, please?
No, wait a second. We'll all get 30 seconds.
They are coming.
We all want 30 seconds to talk about this.
Wendell, go ahead. I think I'm going to turn to Senator McCain and change the subject, if I will.
One thing that has not been mentioned here, which I think is very, very important, if you subsidize something, you get more of it. So we subsidize illegal immigration. We reward it by easy citizenship, either birthright or amnesty. But we force our states and our local communities to pay for the health care and pay for the education. Why wouldn't they bring their families? And because of our economic conditions, we do need workers. But if we had a truly free market economy, the illegal
illegal immigrants would not be the scapegoat. We would probably need them and they would be acceptable, but because of economic conditions, they have become the scapegoat. I think we should read the First Amendment where it says Congress shall write no law, and we should write a lot less laws regarding this matter. It shouldn't be a matter of the president or the Congress. It should be local people, local officials. The state should determine so many of these things that we just don't need more laws determining religious things or prayer in school. We should allow people at the local level. That's what the Constitution tells us. We don't need somebody in Washington telling us what we can do because we don't have perfect knowledge. And that's the magnificence of our Constitution and our republic. We sort out the difficult problems at local levels.
We went in there illegally. We did not declare war. It's lasting way too long. We didn't declare war in Korea or Vietnam. The wars were never really ended. We lose those wars. We're losing this one. We shouldn't be there. We ought to just come home.
And I'd like you to take 30 seconds to answer this. You're basically saying that we should take our marching orders from Al-Qaeda. If they want us off the Arabian Peninsula, we should leave?
No. I'm saying we should take our marching orders from our Constitution. We should not go to war. We should not go to war without a declaration. We should not go to war when it's an aggressive war. This is an aggressive invasion. We've committed the invasion of this war, and it's illegal under international law. That's where I take my marching orders, not from any enemy. If we wouldn't have been dependent on the federal government to set all the rules, which meant no guns and no resistance, then the terrorists may well have had second thoughts because the airlines would have had the responsibility. But we assumed the government was going to take care of us. After 9/11, instead of moving toward the direction of personal responsibility and private property and Second Amendment, we moved in the opposite direction. We turned it over to the federal government, and look at the mess we have now at airports.
If we make a mistake, we make it as a single country, the United States of America, not the divided States of America.
When we make a mistake, it is the obligation of the people through their representatives to correct the mistake, not to continue the mistake.
That you would eliminate the IRS, the CIA, the Federal Reserve, the Department of Homeland Security, Medicare.
You might ask a better question. Before 9/11, we were spending $40 billion a year. And the FBI was producing numerous information about people being trained on airplanes to fly them but not land them. And they totally ignored them. So it's the inefficiency of the bureaucracy that is the problem. Don't we remember that when you sacrifice liberty for security, you lose both? That's what's happening in this country today.
You don't dictate, you don't legislate virtue. In a free society, you do that from the people, from your family, your friends, and your neighbors, but not in the federal government. Also, you can't legislate economic fairness like so many want to do. Freedom means freedom. We are now $9 trillion in debt. We have a dollar that's crashing, and we keep financing this by taxing, borrowing, and then what do we resort to? We resort to printing the money. This is the reason our government gets so big, because we give them license to steal, license to inflate, license to tax, and license to borrow, and politicians will always do it. What we should struggle for is our freedom. Have faith and trust in freedom that it works. We've lost our faith and confidence in ourselves. We feel like we have to be the bullies of the world, and we feel like we have to have government in Washington. What happens when government fails in Washington? Going to go to the UN like we already have? We already obey the WTO. We changed tax laws because of the WTO.
I'm delighted that I was invited, and I'm very pleased because I go wherever I'm invited to talk about.
We have a lot of goodness in this country, and we should promote it, but never through the barrel of a gun. We should do it by setting good standards, motivating people, and have them want to emulate us. But you can't enforce our goodness like the neocons preach with an armed force. It doesn't work. Woodrow Wilson was telling us about that in promoting democracy a long time ago. It doesn't work, and we have to admit it. I think it is the acceptance just recently that we now promote preemptive war. I do not believe that's part of the American tradition. We in the past have always declared war in the defense of our liberties or go to aid somebody. But now we have accepted the principle of preemptive war. We have rejected the just war theory of Christianity. And now, tonight, we hear that we're not even willing to remove from the table a preemptive nuclear strike against the country that has done no harm to us directly and is no threat to our national security. I mean, we have to come to our senses about this issue of war and preemption and go back to traditions and our Constitution and defend our liberties and defend our rights, but not to think that we can change the world by force of arms and to start wars.
What would it be? Just come home. We just marched in. We can just come home. Because reason, it's in our national self-interest and for our national security. Think of our defenses now, how run down they are. What is the morale of our military today when they're sent over there for 12 months and then they're kept for another 3 months? They come home and less than a year's rest, they're sent back again. Congress is currently trying to change the rules so we give these men an adequate rest. This war is not going well because the foreign policy is defective. There's nothing wrong with spreading our values around the world, but it is wrong to spread it by force. We should spread it by setting an example and doing a good job here. Threatening Pakistan and threatening Iran makes no sense whatsoever. We went in, and I supported going after the Al-Qaeda into Afghanistan, but lo and behold, the neocons took over. They forgot about Osama bin Laden, and what they did, they went into nation building not only in Afghanistan, they went unjustifiably over into Iraq, and that's why we're in this mess.
They don't want our troops on the Arabian Peninsula. We have no need for our national security to have troops on the Arabian Peninsula. And going into Iraq and Afghanistan and threatening Iran is the worst thing we can do for our national security. I am less safe. The American people are less safe for this. It's the policy that is wrong. Tactical movements and shifting troops around and taking in 30 more and reducing by 5, totally irrelevant. We need a new foreign policy that said we ought to mind our own business, bring our troops home, defend this country, defend our borders.
So if...
So increasing this with the Department of Homeland Security and spending more money doesn't solve the problem. Yes, we have every right in the world to know something about intelligence gathering, but we have to have intelligent people interpreting this information. We've had secret prisons around the world, and we have torture going on. That's un-American, and we need to use the power of the presidency to get it back in order to take care of us and protect this country and our liberties.
That, to me, is the most important thing, along with the emphasis on the Constitution. I believe so strongly that individuals have their rights and their life as a gift from God, and the purpose of government is to protect life and liberty. But I'd also like to extend that if you have the fruits of your labor, I would like you to keep the fruits of your labor as well. And under those conditions and under a freedom philosophy and under the Constitution, we would be so much more prosperous because we wouldn't be policing the world. We would be bringing our troops home, and we would take care of our people here at home. And if we have a freer society, it will take care of blacks and whites and everybody equally because we're all individuals. And to me, that is so important. But if we had equal justice under the law, I think it would be a big improvement. If we had probably a repeal of most of the federal laws on drugs and the unfairness on how blacks are treated with these drug laws, it would be a tremendous improvement. And also, I think that if you're going to have prosperity, it serves everybody. And if this is done by emphasizing property rights and freedom of the individuals, making sure that the powerful special interests don't control Washington, that the military-industrial complex doesn't suck away all the wealth of the country, and then we will have prosperity. This is what we need, and we need to share it. The free society is the only society that can provide goods and services and distribute them in the most fair manner. And that is the society that I would advocate and argue for and believe it's available to us. Prior to minimum wage laws, there was no discrepancy like this. So he put a lot of blame on the minimum wage law. Once government gets interfering, this takes away opportunities, and I believe there is a lot of truth to this because it eliminates an opportunity and a chance for a marginal worker. And anybody who comes in here illegally shouldn't be rewarded, and that would be the case. But I see the immigration problem as a consequence of our welfare state. Welfare because we encourage people not to work here, but the welfare we offer the people who come, they get free medical care, they get free education, they bankrupt our hospitals are closing, and it should not be rewarded. That means that if you don't round them up, you don't reward them, you don't give them citizenship. At the same time, you can't solve this problem until you get rid of the welfare state, because in a healthy economy, immigrants wouldn't be a threat to us. There would probably be a desire for more because we would be starved for workers. But today, they have become scapegoated because of the weak economy and the lowering of our standard of living. We don't have to have more courts and more prisons. We need to repeal the whole war on drugs. It isn't working. We've had managed care in this country since the early 70s, and it hasn't worked well. It's very, very expensive, and it's the fault that we changed our ERISA law and our tax laws that created this corporatism that runs medicine. Wall Street rakes off the profits, the patients are unhappy, the doctors are unhappy, and it's a monopoly now. Who lobbyists us in Washington? The drug companies and the HMOs, they come, and now what is the cry for? Socialized medicine. That's not the answer. We need to get the government out of the way. Inflation hits the middle class and the poor the most. Those are the people who are losing it. It's just not minorities, anybody poor, because inflation wipes out the middle class, and we have to deal with that. If you have a product that's not dealt with by government, prices go down when you have modern technology. In medicine, with all this technology, prices still go up, but that's because the government is involved. We don't have enough competition. There's a doctor monopoly out there. We need alternative health care freely available to the people. They ought to be able to make their own choices and not controlled by the FDA, preventing them to use some of the medications. It's very clear under the Constitution that we couldn't give the vote to the residents of D.C. without an amendment to the Constitution, and it should be pursued in that manner. But when it comes to national ID cards, I mean, the identification, I think the states have the prerogative and the right and the obligations to identify the voters, and they should. But the reason I get worried about it when we start talking about it nationally is, they might want to use the real ID. They might want to think it's a good excuse to have a national ID card to vote, and I am positively opposed to any move toward the national ID card. The most important promise we keep is the oath to obey the Constitution. We just shouldn't be going to all these wars. We shouldn't have so many injured in our hospitals, because we shouldn't go to war unless it's declared. If it's declared, we should go win it and get it over with. Now we're in this war for 5 years or so, and nobody sees the end to this. So we went in under false pretense. There were no weapons of mass destruction. There are still people who believe that Iraq had something to do with 9/11, yet 15 of the people were from Saudi Arabia. We need to live up to our principles so there are less injured veterans, but when they come home, we better jolly well take care of them, and we're not doing a very good job right now because all the money's going overseas. We're broke, and we got to do something about it. And we can't perpetuate a welfare state and police an empire without going bankrupt, and we're nearly on the verge of that.
Thank you, sir. Senator Brown.
The U.S. government has no authority. There's no constitutional authority. There's no moral authority. There's plenty of moral authority and responsibility for individuals to participate. But every time we get involved, no matter where, for good intentions, believe me, we're getting involved in a civil war. Even when you send food, it ends up in the hands of the military, and they use it as weapons. So it's not well intended. We should direct our attention only to national security and not get involved for these feel-good reasons of going overseas for the various reasons. And this is the main reason why I think that we ought to just come home from every place in the world and bring our troops home from Iraq.
Senator Brown.
Over the years, I've held pretty rigid to all my beliefs, but I've changed my opinion about the death penalty. For federal purposes, I no longer believe in the death penalty. I believe it has been issued unjustly. If you're rich, you get away with it. If you're poor and you're from the inner city, you're more likely to be prosecuted and convicted. And today, with the DNA evidence, there's been too many mistakes, so I am now opposed to the federal death penalty.
Yes, I think this is not a consequence of free markets. What's happening is there's transfer of wealth from the poor and the middle class to the wealthy. This comes about because of a monetary system that we have. When you inflate a currency or destroy a currency, the middle class gets wiped out. So the people who get to use the money first, which is created by the Federal Reserve System, benefit. So the money gravitates to the banks and to Wall Street. So that's why you have more billionaires than ever before. Today, this country is in the middle of a recession for a lot of people. Michigan knows about it. Poor people know about it. The middle class knows about it. Wall Street doesn't know about it. Washington, D.C. doesn't know about it, but it's because of the monetary system and the excessive spending. As long as we live beyond our means, we are destined to live beneath our means, and we have lived beyond our means because we are financing a foreign policy that is so extravagant and beyond what we can control, as well as the spending here at home, and we're depending on the creation of money out of thin air, which is nothing more than debasement of the currency. It's counterfeit, and it is a natural, predictable consequence that you're going to have people benefit from it and other people suffer. So if you want a healthy economy, you have to study monetary theory and figure out why it is that we're suffering. And everybody doesn't suffer equally, or this wouldn't be so bad. It's always the poor people, those on retired incomes, that suffer the most. But the politicians and those who get to use the money first, like the military-industrial complex, they make a lot of money and they benefit from it.
Thank you, Congressman.
Indeed, this war is a mistake, was a mistake to go in. It's very costly, and it has a lot of economic ramifications. We're going broke. We have this huge deficit. We're spending nearly $1 trillion with maintaining our empire overseas, and that's a cost. Right now, we owe foreigners $2.7 trillion. No wonder they have money to come back in here and buy stuff up, and then we object. But that has to do with our monetary system as well as our foreign policy. So if we want prosperity, we have to change our foreign policy. We have to live within our means, but we can't maintain a reserve currency where all our greatest export today are paper dollars. We create money out of thin air, and they still accept it as if it was backed by gold. And that is the reason all this money goes overseas, and at the same time we find all this military activity overseas. It's bankrupting this country. And not only that, it's a threat to our personal liberties here, and it's going to be a threat to our economy because we are beginning to live beneath our means. And that is a natural consequence of what happens when you live beyond your means.
Do you believe the President needs authorization of Congress to attack strategic targets in Iran, nuclear facilities?
Absolutely. This idea of going and talking to attorneys totally baffles me. Why don't we just open up the Constitution and read it? You're not allowed to go to war without a declaration of war. Now, as far as fleeting enemies go, yes, if there's an imminent attack on us, we've never had that happen in 220 years. The thought that the Iranians could pose an imminent attack on the United States is preposterous. There's no way. This is just war propaganda. Continued war propaganda, preparing this nation to go to war and spread this war not only in Iraq but into Iran unconstitutionally. It is a road to disaster for us as a nation. It's a road to our financial disaster if we don't read the Constitution once in a while.
Around the home.
Well, first we have to have a sound economy, and we don't. We're overtaxed, we're overregulated, we work with a currency that is non-functional, and our prosperity is slipping. And we are overextended overseas. You can't have a prosperous economy at home when you're spending all the money overseas. You can't even have a strong national defense if you're spending all this money overseas in wars that we're not winning. So if we want a prosperous economy here, we have to change these policies, and we can't be bailing out farmers and subsidizing ethanol. This is just the wrong way to go. The taxpayers pay for the subsidies, and then they pay for higher prices when they buy the gasoline or buy the food. It never works.
Congressman Ron Paul of Texas, the 1988 Libertarian Party nominee for president, who is currently serving his 10th term in Congress.
Well, we've had managed care now for about 35 years. It's not working, and nobody's happy with it. The doctors aren't happy. The patients aren't happy. Nobody seems to be happy except the corporations, the drug companies, the HMOs. You take care of poor people by turning the medical care back into the system where people have some choices. Now, we have a mess because we have a lot of people very dependent on health care, but I have the only way we can afford to take care of people now because we're going broke. We're $500 billion going into debt every single year, and we have a foreign policy that's straining us. I say take care of these poor people. I'm not against that, but save the money someplace. The only place available for us to save it is to change our attitude about running a world empire and bankrupting this country. We can take care of the poor people, save money, and actually cut some of our deficit. So you don't have to throw anybody on the street, but long term you have to move toward the marketplace. You cannot expect socialized medicine of the Hillary brand to work, and you can't expect the managed care system that we have today, which promotes and benefits and rewards the corporations, because it's the drug companies and the HMOs and even the AMA that comes to us and lobbies us for this managed care, and that's why the prices are high. It's only in medicine where technology has raised prices rather than lowering pricings. It's a mess, and it proves that the government is not very good at central economic planning, even for retirement. But the money was taken from the people with good intention, and we should do our best to return it to those that have taken it. But we need to allow the young people to just flat out get out of the system, because I'll tell you what, if you have the government managing these accounts, it's not going to work. And the other thing that you have to consider if you're really serious about protecting people's incomes, each and every one of us, is how are you going to protect the dollar? If you don't have the dollar maintaining its value, no matter where you put the money, you're not going to have any value. That's where the crisis is coming. You're going to go up with all these cost of living increases, but you'll never keep up with the cost of living because the dollar is going down, the cost of living is going up. Our dollar today is worth 4 cents compared to the dollar of 1913 when the Federal Reserve took in charge of it. And if you don't deal with the dollar, there will be no retirement for anybody. We're going to have chaos. And that is why you have to cut spending. That's why we need a new foreign policy. We need to tie the people over here in this country, the people who are dependent, but we need to let the people get out, whether it's Social Security or medical care or education. The Constitution doesn't advise that we do any of that anyway. That's the only way we can solve the problem. This is a result of a foreign policy of interventionism. The founders advised non-interventionism, and even our president won the election in the year 2000 to have a more humble foreign policy, not to go into nation building and not get involved in internal affairs of other nations. And we won an election on that. But here we are, we're over there, and we've invaded this country, and this is just another unintended consequence. The war is spreading. The war is likely to go into Iran. Nobody's willing to take anything off the table. What would it be like if somebody came in here into Mexico and did some of these things, say like putting missiles in Europe? We're just looking for trouble. It's so unnecessary, and we jeopardize ourselves, and quite frankly, we're not able to afford this. So we don't need to go looking for trouble. We don't need another Cold War, and all we have to do is start talking to people and trading with people. We don't need to assume that the world is going to blow up. Just think of when I was drafted into the military, and I served 5 years in the military. The Soviets had 40,000 nuclear weapons, and here we're now worrying about agitating and putting missiles in Europe. It's the Turks' business. It's not our business.
This country goes to war under UN resolutions. I don't like big government in Washington. So I don't like this trend toward international government. We have a WTO that wants to control our drug industry, our nutritional products. So I'm against all that, but it's not so much as a sinister conspiracy. It's just knowledge is out there. If we look for it, you'll realize that our national sovereignty is under threat. Yes, and I would like to state that the statement earlier made that we all went to Washington, changed Washington, and Washington changed us. I don't think that applies to me. Washington did not change me. The real question you have to ask is, why do I get the most money from active duty officers, military personnel? Just think of the cleaning up of the mess after we left Vietnam. Vietnam now is a friend of ours. We trade with them. The president comes here. What we achieved in peace was unachievable in 20 years of the French and the Americans being in Vietnam. So it's time for us to take care of America first. Shortly after the Vietnam War ended, Colonel Tu and Colonel Summers met, and they were talking about this. And the American colonel said, you know, we never lost one battle. And Colonel Tu, the Vietnamese, says, yes, but that's irrelevant. And it is irrelevant. But we have to realize why they want to come here. Wolfowitz even admitted that one of the major reasons that the Al-Qaeda was organized and energized was because of our military base in Saudi Arabia. He says, oh, now we can take the base away. He understood why they came here. They come here because we're occupying their country, just as we would object if they occupied our country. The infrastructure problem in this country is very, very serious. We as Americans are taxed to blow up the bridges overseas. We're taxed to go over and rebuild the bridges overseas while our bridges are falling down in this country. This country is going bankrupt, and we can't afford this. We need to take care of ourselves. We do not need to sacrifice one thing more. We just need to take care of ourselves and get the government out of our lives and off our back and out of our wallet.
Mr. Paul, I think we both know that the Republican Party is never going to give you the nomination. But I'm hoping that you're crazy like a fox like that, and you're using this exposure to propel yourself into an independent run. My question is for Ron Paul. Mr. Paul, are you going to let America down by not running as an independent? Thank you.
Now that's what I call a tough question, because I have no intention of doing this. I am a Republican. I have won 10 times as a Republican, and we're doing quite well. We had 5,000 people show up at a rally in front of the Independence Hall with blacks and Hispanics and a cross-section of this country. Do you know that we raised $4.3 million in one day without spending 1 cent? We didn't even pay an individual to go out, and they weren't professional fundraisers. It came in here. It was automatic. We're struggling to figure out how to spend the money. This country is in a revolution. They're sick and tired of what they're getting, and I happen to be lucky enough to be part of it.
Are sick and tired of what they're getting, and they want some real changes. I don't want to run your life. You need less taxation, less regulation, a better economic system. We were not meant to be an empire. We were meant to be a republic protecting liberty here at home. It's up to you to spread this message around this country. This is an American cause. It's a cause of freedom. There's something going on in this country, and it's big. It's really big.
It's absolutely a threat to our national security, because we've spent too much, we tax too much, we borrow too much, and we print too much. When a country spends way beyond its means, eventually it will destroy the currency. And we're in the midst of a currency crisis. Our dollar is going down rapidly as we speak. It's because we have lived beyond our means. We can't afford the foreign policy that we have. We have to cut back. We have to live it within our means. If we're going to spend money, we ought to spend it at home, and that is why we have to change this foreign policy. We can't afford it to do what we're doing today, because it will destroy our dollar. It's absolutely unnecessary to sacrifice. We want to give people more freedom, more chance to spend their own money. It's unnecessary. We can cut by looking at our foreign policy. We maintain an empire which we can't afford. We have 700 bases overseas. We are in 130 countries. We cut there. And then we have a better defense of this country, and the people get that money and they get to spend it here at home. There's no need to sacrifice. We need more liberty, more rights for the people to spend their own money, and in that situation, there is no sacrifice and no need for it. The most sinister of all taxes is the inflation tax, and it is the most regressive. It hits the poor and the middle class. When you destroy a currency by creating money out of thin air to pay the bills, the value of the dollar goes down and people get hit with a higher cost of living. It's the middle class that's being wiped out. It is the most evil of all taxes. We need to adopt free trade agreements with other countries. Today, we inhibit the export of, say, farm products to countries like Cuba. It's time we change our attitude about Cuba. We should be looking to open these markets. But our markets get closed for monetary reasons because our chief export is our dollar, because we have the reserve currency of the world. People take these dollars and our jobs go overseas. You can't solve any of these problems if you don't look at the monetary system and how it contributes to these job losses in order to provide the prosperity for our people here at home. The goal of all political action should be to preserve liberty. We need more freedom in this country. We need to look to ourselves and what we are doing. We have drifted so far from our Constitution that the Constitution was written to restrain our government. Yet we've turned around and the Constitution now is used to restrain the people. But we have no chance if we don't restrain the government, all that they do, in undermining our personal liberties, controlling our economic well-being, and using it as an excuse to police the world. If we don't change the role for government, this country is going to suffer a very, very serious economic crisis. Probably the federal government. We've been involved at the federal level for over 50 years. We've had a Department of Education. It used to be the policy of the Republican Party to get rid of the Department of Education. We finally get in charge and a chance to do something, so we doubled the size of the Department of Education, and we have no child left behind. The teachers don't like it, the students don't like it, and the quality of education hasn't gone up. The cost of education has gone up. So we need to look to our local resources. We need to release the creative energy of the teachers at the local level, but what we can do immediately is to give tax credits. I have a bill that would give tax credits to the teachers to raise their salaries. At the same time, we should encourage homeschooling and private schooling and let the individuals write that off. The parents have to get control of the education. It used to be parents had control of education through local school boards. Today, it's the judicial system and the executive branch of government, the bureaucracy that controls things. And it would be predictable that the quality would go down. The money goes to the bureaucrats and not to this educational system at home.
Congressman Paul, let me ask you, do you agree with the Bush doctrine, or would you change it?
Well, I certainly agreed with his foreign policy that he ran on and that we as Republicans won in the year 2000. You know, the humble foreign policy, no nation building, don't be the policeman of the world. And we were strongly critical of the policy of the Clinton administration that did the opposite. And we fell short. Of course, the excuse is that 9/11 changed everything. But the Bush doctrine of preemptive war is not a minor change. This is huge. This is the first time we as a nation accept as our policy that we start the wars. I don't understand this, and that all options are on the table to go after Iran. I mean, this is not necessary. These are third world nations. They're not capable. But I think it's the misunderstanding or the disagreements that we've had in this debate along the campaign trail is the nature of the threat. I'm as concerned about the nature of the threat of terrorism as anybody, if not more so. But they don't attack us because we're free and prosperous. And there are radicals in all elements, in all religions, that will resort to violence. But if we don't understand that the reaction is because we invade their countries, and occupy their countries, we have bases in their country, and we haven't done it just since 9/11, but we have done that a long time. I mean, it was the Air Force base in Saudi Arabia before 9/11 that was given as the excuse. If we don't understand that, we can't win this war against terrorism. Let me try to explain so you can understand this better. Try to visualize how we would react if they did that to us. If a country, say China, came that great distance across the ocean, and they say, we want you to live like us. We want you to have our economic system. We want bases on your land. We want to protect our oil. Even if we do that with good intentions, even if the Chinese did that with good intentions, we would all be together and we'd be furious.
Ron, you're reading their propaganda. You're reading their propaganda.
What would you do?
I'd read things.
We were occupying. We had an air base in Saudi Arabia.
Ron,
we have propped up. How many governments have we propped up?
Just before we stop, Governor Huckabee, I owe you a few seconds because you.
There's always a radical element in almost all religions. They have to have an incentive. We give them that incentive. The question that you aren't willing to ask is, why is it that they attack America? I mean, they don't attack the Canadians. They don't attack the Swiss. If it were merely because because they want to go into Europe.
Is it such a puzzle? Is it such a mystery as to why they attack America?
It is.
They're not going after Luxembourg.
It is because we've gone. It is because we've gone 6 miles.
We're the strongest nation in the world.
And we have.
Ron, it's simply not true.
Why do we support their dictators then? Why do we prop up all their dictators? And we should all come together, and we shouldn't have that many disagreements because we should be bound down by the Constitution. But the people in this country think we live in an age of relative ethics, is what they kind of have come to the conclusion of. Sure, profess to believe in the Constitution, but why have we gone to war since World War II without a declaration of war? Why do we have a monetary system that is not designed by the Constitution? Why do we have a welfare state running out of control, not designed by the Constitution? You can't pay lip service to the Constitution without obeying it. And we should have peace and prosperity. That should be our goal. We in foreign policy ought to have a golden rule. We ought to treat others as we would want others to treat us, and we don't treat others so fairly. We treat them like we're the bully, that we're the policeman of the world, and we're going to tell them to behave. If they don't listen to us, we bomb them. If they listen to us, we give them more money, and it's bankrupting this country. There is an inflationary factor. We can't afford it. We do have good medical care, but the costs are so high now that our people in this country are actually going to India and getting their heart surgery done. They pay the plane ticket, the hospital, and the hotel, and they get it for half price. So it's inflation. But if you don't understand how inflation comes, we can't solve this problem. It comes from deficit financing with this warmongering foreign policy we have. We run up the deficits, we tax, we borrow from the Chinese, we can't borrow enough. Then what do? We print the money, and then you wonder where the inflation comes? The value of the dollar goes down and prices go up where the government gets involved in certain things like housing or medical care or education. Prices are skyrocketing. So you have to deal with the monetary issue to solve the problem of the medical issue. But one thing that we haven't talked about here is about the economics of illegal immigration. You can't solve this problem as long as you have the runaway welfare state and excessive spending and the wiping out of the middle class through inflation, because that's what directs the hostility. Is people are hurting. And then when we have all these mandates on the hospitals and on our schools, and no wonder the incentives are there. There's an incentive for a lot of our people not to work because they can get welfare, and then there's a lot of incentives because they know they're going to get amnesty. We gave it to the illegals in the 80s, and then we put mandates on the states to compel them to have medical care. And you say, well, that's compassion. But what happens if the hospital closes and then the people here in this country don't get medical care? So you can't divorce it from the economics. You've got to get rid of the incentives, no amnesty, and no forced benefits, because obviously they'll bring their families. And it just won't work if you try to see this in a vacuum, and you have to deal with it as a whole, as an economic issue as well. But I talk a lot more about different kind of economic policies. I talk about personal liberty and the right to people's personal life and getting stopping these wars and coming home and having a sensible monetary policy, and young people like this. But Barack Obama is not going to talk about the goal of getting rid of the income tax and dealing with monetary policy. I mean, he is too much into the welfare state issue, not quite understanding how free market economics is the truly compassionate system. If we care about the poor and want to help the poor, you have to have free markets. You can't have a welfare state in order to try to take care of people. The recession has been predictable. We just don't know exactly when it'll come. But if you do the wrong thing, it's going to last for a long time. The boom period comes when they just pour out easy credit, and it teaches people to do the wrong things. There's a lot of malinvestment, debt that goes in the wrong directions. Consumers do the wrong things, and businessmen do the wrong thing. So we have to attack this and understand the importance of Austrian theory of the business cycle. If you don't, we're going to continue to do this, and the longer you delay the recession, the worse the recession is. And we've delayed a serious recession for a long time. The housing market is already in depression. And a lot of people are hurting. The standard of living in this country is going down. Look at what's happening to the dollar. And what is being offered by the Federal Reserve and Treasury and everybody in Washington? Lower interest rates. Well, lower interest rates is the problem. Artificially low interest rates is the artificial stimulus which causes the bubble, which allows the inevitable recession to come. So what we need to do is deal with monetary policy and not pretend that artificial stimulus by more spending is going to help. That won't do one bit of good.
Governor Huckabee,
may I answer that? May I answer that?
Yes, Congressman.
I'm talking exactly about that because that's what we have been doing. We used to support Saddam Hussein and we used to be allied with Osama bin Laden. And what I want to do is stop that. Who are our friends one day turn out to be our enemies. Right now, we finally got rid of Saddam Hussein. And what are we doing now? We're rearming the Sunnis, the old henchmen of Saddam Hussein. And what are they going to do with it? There's all those weapons we're giving the Sunnis in Baghdad. So look out. Believe me, that war is not over. And right now, they're demanding more troops in Afghanistan. And some people, like the senator, he thinks we should be there for 100 years if necessary. How can he commit the young people of this world 5 more generations to be in Iraq if it's necessary? I say it's time to come home. Besides, we don't have any money to do this.
Congressman Paul, yet another question about electability. Do you have any, sir? There's always the question as to whether or not you are in fact viable. Your differences with the Republicans with the rest of the Republicans on this stage has raised questions about whether or not you can actually win the Republican nomination, sir.
Well, we've only had 2 little primaries so far, so it's pretty premature to decide which one is going to be the candidate. But, you know, when you think about it, if you measured everything I've ever said, every vote I've ever taken against the Constitution, you know, I'm a strict constitutionalist. Are you suggesting the Republicans should write me off because I'm a strict constitutionalist? I'm the most conservative member here. I have voted, you know, against more spending and wasting government than anybody else. So you're suggesting that I'm not electable and the Republicans don't want me because I'm a strict fiscal conservative? Because I believe in civil liberties? Why should we not be defending civil liberties? And why should we not be talking about foreign policy that used to be the part of the Republican Party? Mr. Republican Robert Taft didn't even want us to be in NATO. And you're saying now that we have to continue to borrow money from China to finance this empire that we can't afford? Let me see if I get this right. We need to borrow $10 billion from China, and then we give it to Musharraf, who's a military dictator who overthrew an elected government, and then we go to war, we lose all these lives promoting democracy in Iraq. I mean, what's going on here? And you're saying that this isn't appealing to Republicans? Where did this come about? I think this is a Republican message. I defend the platform. It used to say we got rid of the Department of Education. It doesn't say that. Now, we as Republicans went and doubled the size of the Department of Education. So where have we gone? I think we've lost our way. And then the insinuation that I am less Republican because of that?
Congressman.
But I think this whole thing should be thought of more in economic terms. Maybe I think about economics too much, but there is something said in economics that if you subsidize something, you get more of it. And this is what we do. We encourage it by giving free medical care and free education and the promise of amnesty. And no wonder more will come. We have a weakened economy, and now immigrants, especially the illegals, are seen as a threat because they come and they undermine our tax system when some of our hospitals are being closed, and some of our people won't work because of the welfare state. You can't solve this problem if you don't deal with the terms of welfareism. And besides, you know, some of our border guards are over in Iraq. I think they'd be better off on our borders, you know, protecting our borders, not in Iraq. So, yes, I think we have to deal with it. If we don't do it with carefully, yeah, we're going to lose some votes on it. But quite frankly, the law is the law, and we should enforce the law. And this is what we're doing today to ourselves, is we're literally spending ourselves into oblivion. But nobody here is willing to even suggest that we cut something overseas. But we have to. We don't need to cut anything here at home. I'd like to see things frozen. I'd like to see massive tax cuts. But we need deregulation. I was one of 3 people that voted against Sarbanes-Oxley. I knew that would be a problem, and it is a problem to the financial markets. So this is the kind of thing we need. We need the government out of the way, but it should have sound money, low taxes, less regulations, and a sensible policy where we're not wasting our money overseas. There was never my participation in this. I was waving a flag the whole time saying, slow up, slow up. This isn't going well. And here we are. We're at the verge of bankruptcy. We're moving into a new era, believe it or not. With the dollar and our economy and the world economy, this is a new era. Yes, but not overnight. Matter of fact, my program is the only one that is going to be able to take care of the elderly. I'd like to get the young people out of it, just the next generation, because there's no money there. And they're going to have to pay 50 years and they're not going to get anything. There's no money there. Now, I'm saying I'd take care of all the elderly, all those who are dependent, but I would save the money from this wild spending overseas. We can save hundreds of billions of dollars and still take care of the elderly. Right now, they're getting behind because they're having a 10 to 12% inflation rate and we give them a 2% increase. So they're really hurting. I don't want taxes on the Social Security benefits that they receive. I have a bill in that would secure the trust fund where none of that money could be spent in the general revenues. So in many ways, though, the goal would be to get us out of this program that is a failure. It doesn't work and is going to bankrupt this country, that the only way you can do that is save enough money, tide the people over, let the young people get out. Because they're going to be paying all these years and they're not going to get anything. So ironically, I who defend the position that, the federal government probably should have never been involved, I probably have the only program that would really help the elderly, because the way we're going now, the money's not going to be there. There's no way these cost of living increases are ever going to keep up with their benefits are never going to keep up with their cost of living. They're decreasing. I say my program has a better chance of helping them than any other one. No, I have no intention of going into another party. I've been elected 10 times as a Republican. I was from a Republican family, and no, I don't plan to do that. I wish they would worry about it, just in case, but no, I have no intention of doing that, but it might keep them on their toes. But no, I just think that the Republican Party has a problem because we don't act like Republicans. And we talked about this earlier, that we're spending money that we don't have. We run up these deficits. Instead of, in the old days, we used to be against the Department of Education. Now we doubled the size of it. No child left behind. Even the Democrats are running against some of the things that we do. And they used to love that kind of stuff. And it used to be that we used to stop the wars. We stopped the Korean War. We were supposed to stop the Vietnam War that the Democrats started. And here we're starting these wars. So that's why we've lost our way. So I don't think it's a matter of me leaving the Republican Party. If they would look toward what we're doing and the number of people who want to come into the party, they shouldn't be obstructing us. They should welcome. The party's getting smaller. Yet they say, oh, you're too strict on the Constitution. Why should us who believe strictly in the Constitution and rule of law be excluded? That's the way a lot of the people that gather around my candidacy think they're being treated. So I would say, why don't we have a big tent and welcome those of us who believe in liberty and believe in the Constitution? That's what it's all about, and that's what the Republican Party used to stand for. I don't even think they should have gone. So keeping them for 100 years, where's the money going to come from? The country's in bankruptcy, and when I listen to this argument, I find it rather silly because they're arguing technicalities of a policy they both agree with. They agreed going in, they agreed for staying how many years, and these are technicalities. We should be debating foreign policy, whether we should have interventionism or non-interventionism, whether we should be defending this country or whether we should be the policemen of the world, whether we should be, running our empire or not, and how are we going to have guns and butter? The 70s were horrible because we paid for the guns and butters of the 60s. Now we're doing the same thing, and nobody even seems to care. The dollar's crashing, and you're talking about these technicalities about who said what when. In 1952, we Republicans were elected to stop the war in Korea.
1968, we were elected to stop the war in Vietnam. And tragically, we didn't stop it very fast. 30,000 more men died. So when I talk about these long-term stays, I think, how many men are you willing to let die for this? For something that has nothing to do with our national security. There were no Al-Qaeda there, had nothing to do with 9/11, and there was no threat to our national security. They never committed aggression. It's unconstitutional. It's an undeclared war. And we have these silly arguments going on about who said what when. I think it's time to debate foreign policy and why we don't follow the Constitution and only go to war with a declaration of war.
Hi, Congressman Paul.
Look at the history over the last 10, 20, or 30 years where we have made our effort. It really never got to the people it was intended to help. So first, we undermine our economic system here by taking it from working people here. And then we end up in a good effort either in Iraq or in Rwanda with an intent of helping people, and it really doesn't end up doing it. It serves the interests of powerful special interests. So therefore, for constitutional reasons and for practical reasons, I don't endorse that concept. But in the interim period, if you did have funds in the United Nations, I certainly would use those funds in this manner to help people who are starving and having these difficulties. And hopefully we could be better in allotting these funds to do a much better job. Well, not by robbing people, somebody else that's not interested in this subject. That would never be a justification of taxing somebody to do good for somebody else. Prices go up. If you're concerned about prices, which is what you said, prices go up because the value of the dollar goes down. The value of the dollar goes down because we print too many of them. Why do we print too many dollars? Well, to fight wars that are unnecessary and undeclared and run a welfare state. So if you are concerned about prices of anything in medical health care, you have to deal with the subject of the dollar. The dollar is in big trouble now because for decades now we have just printed dollars in order to pay our bills. But when it comes to doing good for our neighbors, no matter how well intended, it doesn't justify taking that fund, those funds from somebody else. You can't just say, well, the government is supposed to do this, because when the government does it, they have no resources. They have to take it from somebody else, or they borrow it, or they print the money to do it. And then when you do that, you cause the prices to go up, so you've defeated the purpose and the intent of what you wanted to do. So the government being involved in distributing any type of medication literally ends up in trouble. Just look at how what has happened in the last 35 years since we've had managed health care. We've turned the business over to the corporations. The drug companies have control of these products, and they lobby Congress, and they're running the medical system. So we have corporatism. So as long as you endorse some combination of government and corporations to solve some of these problems, all you're going to get is worse medical care and higher costs, and the very people you're trying to help will not be helped. Well, there'd be a couple things. I voted for the authority to go after the Al-Qaeda, and I voted for the funding. But that was a great disappointment because the funds weren't used for that purpose. The funds were used to go into Afghanistan and secure Afghanistan for the purpose of oil and gas pipelines and for other reasons. We went into nation building. When we had Osama bin Laden on the run at Tora Bora, we virtually ignored him and allowed him to escape into Pakistan. Instead of pursuing him, what we ended up doing was borrowing more money and literally printing more money and giving it to Musharraf, who's the dictator of Pakistan, and say, hey, you be our guy, you go after Osama bin Laden, which he promptly did not do. And so now we're unhappy with Musharraf. We're now trying to undermine his government and put another military dictator in his place. The other thing that I would have done, I would have pursued him there at Tora Bora. I would not have gone into nation building in Afghanistan. But the other thing that I would have done, and I introduced this idea in the Congress, and that is revive the idea of the letter of marque and reprisal, which is in the Constitution. It was used in our early years to go after the pirates, targeting individuals who would do us harm but didn't belong to a particular country. So to limit the scope of the war, instead of declaring war on everybody and anybody, as we have done on the war on terrorism and going into nation buildings against countries that had nothing to do with it, we could have targeted, in a very narrow sense, those individuals who committed the crime against us. But ultimately, of course, we have to look, if we want to solve that problem, we have to look at the cause and the reasons that terrorism is such a threat to us. And quite frankly, it has nothing to do because we're free and prosper. It has a lot to do with our intrusive and very aggressive foreign policy in the Middle East.
Well, you ought to come to some of our rallies and see how the young people are responding to me. But I think your statistics are probably correct. And it's not so much that the Democrats have offered us very much and anything really different. What has happened is Republican parties deserve to be punished. They've gotten us into a war. There's an undeclared war, and it looks like it will never end. One of our candidates say we should stay there for 100 years. We've run up the deficit. We claim we were conservatives. We didn't do it. And we have done exactly opposite of what we have said. So a lot of people are turned off. But if you look at the reasons, what you need to do is come and look at some of our rallies and talk to the young people who rally to us. And guess what I offer them? Freedom. Freedom to lead their lone lives as they choose, freedom to spend their money as they choose, and freedom to get out from under the heavy hand of government, freedom from the threat that there's going to be a draft, freedom from the intrusiveness of the federal government coming in with national ID cards, invasion of our internet, looking at our emails, and having searches without warrants. This is what the young people I meet are looking for, and they are not looking for national ID cards, and they're not really, the people I meet, the young people I meet, are not looking for handouts. They just want to be left alone. A lot of young people work hard, try to work their way through college, and they go out and get a job that pays tips. For instance, I have a bill that says no taxes on tips, but I happen to take the position that I don't give grants from the federal government to people who need the money, because I don't believe I have the right to take the money away from somebody who didn't get to go to college and pay somebody else. But if you get the government out of the way and get the taxes down, give them a sound currency so there's no inflation. None of the other candidates have talked about sound money and why we shouldn't print money out of thin air. Until we talk about that, we can't solve the problem of the business cycle, the financial bubble bursting that we see, the housing collapse that we have, and the inflation, the high cost of living. This is a monetary policy, and it's astounding when I talk to the young people on campuses. They're cheering loudly when I attack the Federal Reserve System and this whole system of money run by our central bankers and the military-industrial complex and the many industries who benefit from this kind of program, as well now as a medical-industrial industry. Corporations now benefit from medicine. So when the young people hear this, believe me, they respond very favorably. Well, one thing I would do is I would let the market determine the price of fuel. And if it went up, we'd quit using it, and we would have alternative sources. But, you know, it's interesting on how much money we spend, protecting our oil companies. That's what our military does in the Middle East, to protect the oil companies. And they claim this to keep the price of oil low and plentiful in this country. Of course, since we've been over there, the price of oil went from $27 a barrel up to $97 a barrel. But, you know, the Pentagon, out of 212 countries of the world, it is the 46th largest country in the world. That means they're using more energy and burn more CO2, put more CO2 in the atmosphere than even the country of Sweden. So I would say there's a lot we could do if we had a different foreign policy. And closely aligned to this is, dropping these bombs and releasing depleted uranium is very dangerous. So the best way to get off a fossil fuel is let the price rise when the price is too high, and then there should be alternatives, but we should get out of the way. For instance, instead of letting the government make these decisions, our government went and decided, well, ethanol was a good idea. But it turns out that subsidies to the corn growers to give us ethanol takes more energy than the energy we get from it. It turns out also that if you produced ethanol from hemp, which is illegal in this country, you could get a lot more ethanol, and it would be easier and cleaner than what we do in the other areas. But we need to get out of the way. The one principle you have to defend in a free market economy is nobody has the right to pollute their neighbor's air, water, or land. And for so long, too often, over the many, many years, even when the Industrial Revolution occurred, the industrialists as well as the governments were in collusion, and they did not protect the people against the pollution. And if
if we recognize the importance of private property and allowed the market to work, believe me, we would have a much better chance in having alternative fuels and not worry about our dependence on fuels overseas to the point where we literally use our military to defend those corporations who are drilling these wells and running these wells overseas and making all this money. This is talking about reversing course, going back to the original revolution where we honored and respected and understood and trusted free people to decide what's best for their lives and what's best for the economy. The interesting thing is when I talk about why I should be or would like to be president, I don't come up and say, well, I know how to run your life and I know how to run the economy. I say the opposite. I want to be president because I don't want to run your life. I don't even know how to run your life. I don't think I should run your life. I don't have the authority. And likewise, I don't want to run the economy. Only people can run the economy because it's you who have your money. What I want to restore is freedom and a sound currency and healthy markets so that you can spend your money. And I certainly don't want to be president because I want to run the world and tell other people what they should do internally with their affairs. If you want a candidate to really challenge the status quo and bring up some issues that not many talk about, no other candidate has talked about monetary policy, and yet the young people understand it because it's not complex. And this is the threat to us, this whole idea that we're going to spend endlessly and we're delivering it to the young people, an obligation of $70 trillion, and that we expect the young people to keep working hard, pay taxes, suffer the consequences of inflation, and continue to fight these no-win wars. When the young people hear this, they say, we do want to change, even if it means we are going to assume total responsibility for our own lives, and we're not expecting a handout. When they hear this, they say, that's my way, because government has failed. Government has not been able to take care of any of us, only to a degree, but right now everybody's realizing we're in near bankruptcy, we're running out of wealth, and what we have to do is restore confidence in freedom, restore confidence in our Constitution.
Well, I think strength is good, but you have to have strength in doing the right things. I think secret military prisons, keeping people there for years and years without due process, is not a characteristic of a republic that believes in freedom. It is just not the process. It's more typical of an authoritarian government to have secret prisons. So therefore, I don't think it serves our purpose. We have tried nearly 300 suspects in civilian courts, and hundreds of them have been convicted and put away. So why are we afraid of openness? Why do we have to move in the direction of giving up the right of habeas corpus, which someday, if we're not careful, will affect American citizens? We should treat people the way we think we might be treated under dire circumstances. So we do not need secret prisons, nor do we need the torture that goes on in these secret military prisons.
And you want to cut government spending, you say, by 50%, eliminating everything from the Federal Reserve to the Department of Homeland Security. Yeah, under your plan, what would you leave for the federal government to do?
Yeah, I'd sort of like to follow the Constitution, and then we wouldn't have these kind of problems. No, you have a government that provides national defense, but you don't have militarism and you police the world. Maybe we could take care of some people back here at home if we weren't spending $1.5 trillion a year on our militarism. That money needs to be spent back at home, and we would have more defense, not less defense. So I don't see why we should raise the national debt. You say, well, default. Probably not. They have money coming in. They can patch it over and pay it, but that's the only way they're going to get a message. But so once again, we're going to default. We're defaulting every single day. That's what your prices are doing. Prices go up, they're defaulting on your money. So we need to look at the Federal Reserve System. So no, the union wage is an artificial wage mandated by the government under the National Labor Relations Board. The whole thing is unconstitutional. They shouldn't be telling people where to go. The Interstate Commerce Clause should be there to facilitate and allow people to move their businesses back and forth and not to inhibit business decisions.